The first bill on the agenda is House File 117, Representative Stevenson's bill. Representative Stevenson, would you like to move your bill to be placed on the general register?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would move that House File 117 be recommended to be placed on the general register.
Okay. Thank you. So Representative Stevenson has moved House File 117 to the general register. And I understand you have an A1 amendment.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I would move the A1 amendment. It's an author's amendment that gets the bill in the shape I'd like the committee to consider it.
Okay. Is there any discussion regarding the amendment? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the amendment's adopted. The bill's in the shape you would like. Representative Stevenson, to your bill.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, in 2010, the United States Supreme Court opened the floodgates on campaign spending in its Citizens United decision. The court overturned decades of settled law, decimated our country's pretty much already weak campaign finance regime, and allowed practically unlimited campaign spending. A decade later, the results are in. They are not so good. Campaigns are absurdly expensive, and most of the spending is done by shadowy special interest groups as opposed to the candidates themselves or even political parties. Minnesotans are tired of that permanent campaign. They hate the flood of negative TV ads, negative mail, negative digital ads, and constant campaign activity. And I think they rightly think that huge corporations and the fabulously wealthy have oversized influence in our elections. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court has taken away most of the tools in the toolbox the legislature has to regulate campaign spending. But there is one restriction that's still permissible under federal constitutional law. We can still restrict contributions and spending by foreign nationals. Minnesota law already does this for individuals, but doesn't address foreign corporations. The bill I am bringing before you today does just that. It's a relatively simple, straightforward bill that extends the existing prohibition on foreign nationals contributing to our campaigns and elections to foreign companies. I think it's well known or well thought that the Citizens United's decision stands for the proposition that corporations are people. And if that is the law, and people, foreign nationals can't contribute, foreign people can't contribute to our elections, it stands to reason that foreign corporations can't either. So that's the bill. I think there is some testimony, Mr. Chair. We had a video that we were hoping to play of a professor of constitutional law who was going to explain in a couple minutes what I was talking about the state of play on constitutional principles. So we unfortunately aren't able to get the audio to work this morning, I understand. And so I think that we will distribute that video to members via email. It's only 3 minutes long, and I think it's a good explanation for the constitutional principles at work here. But Mr. Chair, I understand there might be some additional testifiers.
Sure. Thank you, Representative Stevenson. Yes, our committee administrator, Mr. Brown, will send that video out to committee members. And I did watch that video. It is an insightful video, so I would encourage members to view it. So I have 4 people who have signed up to testify. The first on the list is Ken Peterson. If you could come forward, Mr. Peterson. And after Mr. Peterson will be Rich Graves. If you want to get ready to come down as well, that would be great.
Good morning. How are you?
So if you could keep your testimony to 3 minutes or so, that would be helpful. And welcome to the committee. Please identify yourself for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members. My name is Ken Peterson, and I'm a board member of the organization Clean Elections Minnesota. We're a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that supports fair elections in our state. We support House File 117 and I urge you to support it, to vote for it. We think it would close a potentially dangerous loophole in our electoral system. I'm not going to talk about, as a supporting witness, I'm not going to go into the details of the Citizens United case or what this bill does with that. Rather, I want to talk about foreign influence and 2 different historic traditions in our in American history and what's going on here. First is, throughout American history, we've been pretty open to foreign investment. The railroads were built with European and British money. We've always welcomed foreign investment, and the idea has continued today, so that our number one selling beer, Budweiser, is owned by a Belgian company. 22% of the financial giant Morgan Stanley is owned by Mitsubishi in Japan. Uber is owned by, 5% of Uber is owned by Saudi Arabia. There's nothing wrong with that. Americans should welcome foreign investment, and American investors likewise should be able to invest in other nations. The free flow of capital makes our economic system function as well as it does, and has worked for hundreds of years. But what is threatening, and I guess and historically it's been threatening to Americans, is when foreigners attempt to influence our democratic system. There's always been a hostility to foreign involvement in our elections. And that's why both Minnesota law and federal law forbids, specifically forbids foreign nationals from contributing to U.S. campaigns. It's very clear. In 2011, in the case of Blumen versus the Federal Elections Commission, a three-judge federal appeals court panel headed by now Justice Brett Kavanaugh, then Judge Kavanaugh, upheld the ban on political contributions from foreign individuals. Kavanaugh wrote that U.S. has a compelling interest in preserving self-governance, and I quote, and thereby prevent influence over the U.S. political process. A year later, the U.S. Supreme Court agreed with Judge Kavanaugh and upheld the decision. So it's very clear that we don't want foreign investment or foreign involvement in our elections. And using then Judge, now Justice Kavanaugh's straightforward logic, the state of Minnesota should extend that ban to foreign influence corporations, which this bill does. I learned yesterday that 40% of all stock in American companies is owned by foreigners, by foreign institutions, foreign individuals, that sort of thing. As I said earlier, we should not have a problem with that ownership, but we should ensure that foreign corporate ownership doesn't take away Americans' freedom to run their own government, to select their own leaders, and to make their own decisions. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Peterson. Next on the list is Rich Graves, and after Rich Graves will be Ron Fine. Please come forward. Mr. Peterson, you may want to vacate the...
Yes, I will.
He's signing the...
I want to stay here all
Oh,
day.
gotcha.
Just feel happy here.
Thank you. Welcome to the committee. Please identify yourself for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Rich Graves. I wasn't in a hurry. I'm Rich Graves. I'm here supporting Isaiah, Minnesota, and HF 117.
Proceed.
My daughter was here for the YMCA Youth in Government 2 weeks ago. As we walk in the Capitol Rotunda, you see the showcases of the Civil War. Schools teach that this saved government of the people, by the people, for the people. Personally, I've worked in cybersecurity for 25 years in Minnesota and elsewhere with public trust and international partners. I've seen attacks on people, on American companies, and on democracy. I saw phishing, hacking, propaganda pitting neighbors against neighbors. As a security professional, there is no doubt that this occurred. As a person of faith, a couple of days after the MLK weekend, I hope we can agree that the interests of people should not be drowned out by influence operations. I've seen political violence. I have friends who were victims of torture in their home countries. In Minnesota, we have the Center for Victims of Torture. I've seen governments subverted, mostly in other countries. I'm not interested in seeing that here. Minnesotans have First Amendment rights. This includes their money because money talks. Professionally, I've worked on audit and compliance issues in governance. In my experience, it is reasonable to ask big sources of money with interest in government policy to swear that they are not under undue influence. I'd like to be able to tell my kids that the state works for the people, not for the high bidder, especially if what the high bidder wants is for Minnesotans to fight each other. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Graves. Next on the list is Ron Fine. And after Ron Fine will be Matt Kinney. Is Ron Fine present? Okay, I'm not seeing him. So Matt Kinney, you are up next. Once you've gotten to the table, please identify yourself and proceed with your testimony.
Good morning. My name is Matt Kinney. Good morning, Committee Chair Freiberg, Vice Chair Agreement, and members of the Elections, Finance, and Policy Committee. I live in St. Louis Park, and I'm here today to testify in support of House File 117, which would prohibit political activities by foreign influence corporations. I'd like to start with a couple of quotations that I'm sure you will recognize. The first is from the Declaration of Independence, and it's we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. And the second one's from Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. The government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. In neither quote do you hear anything remotely like government for the corporations, or government for the wealthy, or government for the powerful. What I hear in these quotations is that our government is supposed to be about people, not corporations, not the wealthy, not the powerful. And it isn't just me who feels this way. When I was out door knocking last fall, in support of candidates who shared my concern over the state of our democracy, I heard the same thing over and over again. Corporations and the wealthy have too much power compared to everyday people like me. This bill would start to give our elections back to the people. It would move us toward a system where every person has an equal say in our elections, closer to the system the founders of our nation intended. I urge you all to support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any members of the public who would like to testify on this bill? Okay, seeing none, is there any member discussion? Representative Bliss.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question, several, actually. On your amendment, you changed the definition or the term owner to investor. Is there a percentage? I don't see investor listed as a definition. Is there a percentage of ownership that is considered an investor?
Representative Stevenson.
Mr. Chair, Representative Bliss, I think I'm going to find it in the where we line it up here, but what we're talking about is the percent of ownership stake that you have in the company. If you exceed 5%, then you qualify as a foreign influence corporation. So the threshold that you're looking for is 5%. And that there is a definition of foreign investor to your first question, but if you look to lines starting at 2.6, there's discussion of the threshold that creates a foreign influence corporation.
I think Mr. Gehring might have some comments to this point also. I see you nodding, so Mr. Gehring.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Chair, Representative Bliss. So on line 2.9, you see a standard of if it's a single foreign investor, the threshold is 1% of the total equity of the corporation. And on line 2.12, if there's two or more foreign investors in the corporation, the threshold is 5% of the total equity. And that's the definition that would then trigger the standard for the company being a foreign influence corporation.
So,
Representative Bliss.
thank you, Mr. Chair. So if for instance, I'm invested through multiple stock index funds, emerging Asia, emerging markets, European markets. I'm assuming England and all the rest of those investor markets has an emerging American stock market fund. Would that be, if they controlled 5% on that fund, if they controlled 5% of the company or corporation in question, would they then be considered a foreign owner or investor?
Mr. Gehring?
Mr. Chair, Representative Bliss, I think under this definition, I would, if the foreign stock index fund holds 5% or more of the total equity of the corporation, and there's two or more owners in that fund, then I think the answer is yes.
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Representative Stevenson.
And just, I think this is what, the key thing is who owns the fund, Mr. Chair, Representative Bliss. You know, the fact that there's a fund that exists in England that owns some American companies, it depends on who owns the fund. If it's owned by UK citizens, then yes.
Okay.
Representative Bliss.
Thank you.
Follow.
You made a nice presentation, and we should have had some threatening music playing when you're talking about the shadowy money and elections and all that. You know, I find it interesting that most of the dark money comes from PACs, and if I'm correct, they're nonprofits, some of them. Especially, for instance, the George Soros funds are nonprofits, which are excluded if I read the bill correctly. Is that correct?
Representative Stevenson.
Mr. Chair, Representative Bliss, I think this is a really serious issue, and I don't think that it's inaccurate to say that there are shadowy organizations trying to influence the elections, and I think a lot of the PACs and super PACs that exist out there should have more transparency. I think there's more influence that these large corporations and super PACs have than they should. I also will note that the bill doesn't allow foreign influence corporations to make a contribution to any entity for the purpose of influencing an election. So I think it would include a lot of the activity you're talking about.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So a George Soros super fund that can contribute to a political action group here in Minnesota that wants to elect prosecutors, for instance. They did that in Arkansas. The sole contributor to that entity in Arkansas was the George Soros Fund. And it was a one issue entity that their sole goal was to elect prosecutors that would promote George Soros's philosophy. And if you want to talk about a dark money, I think George Soros should be the poster child for that dark money. So I would like to see this brought down to nonprofits, and I think the unions in Minnesota, the public sector unions, contribute far more to the Democrat Party than the Republican Party, and far more attack ads on the Republicans. And I know personally there's a lot of public school teachers, for instance, that don't appreciate their money being used for political campaigns. So the fact that this bill doesn't include PACs or nonprofits and unions troubles me a little bit.
Any additional member discussion? Representative Bonner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Stevenson, for bringing this forward. I think at the end of the day, the heart of this issue is about transparency. And, you know, certainly there's a large difference between an American citizen exercising their right to free speech and a corporation who has foreign influence. And I really appreciate that Mr. Graves brought forward some of the very serious things that have been happening in the cyber world, in particular with the idea of foreign influence. This is a very real threat. Some of you may know that I am a member of the new Legislative Commission on Cybersecurity, a member of the Technical Advisory Council from the governor. I've been in the IT industry for over 20 years, and I can tell you we have seen a steady increase in an attempt by foreign corporations and entities to interfere in our elections. And I think when we talk to people, everyday citizens, they don't need any deep dive and nitpicky piece to understand that we don't want foreign investment in our elections. We don't want foreign influence in our elections. And I think the average citizen understands that, they are clear on that, and they absolutely do not want it. And so I want to say thank you to Representative Stephenson for bringing this forward, because I think it is very clear by the voters that I spoke to that they want the voice of the people to ring true, not foreign corporations or investors. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Bonner. Representative Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do appreciate that the author indicated the legislative intent was corporations and other entities, which would be NGOs, PACs, and et cetera. So legislative intent are entities that have foreign funding flowing into them, which many NGOs have. And it would be nice to have that more explicitly evident in the bill, language-wise. The other thing I look at is that I remember a few years ago a announcement celebration that SEIU had a lot of non-American citizen members and activities. So therefore, my understanding from listening to the discussion here, from the testimony, from the members, and from the author, is that those are entities with, foreign money going in, because if you're a non-American citizen and you're contributing into the dues, it's going into the political activities of the organization, and therefore that would be against the existing, foreign individuals aren't allowed to contribute. But it also go against this bill, and it'd be nice to have that included in this bill, because if we're going to straighten out the situation, then the partial, narrow interpretation needs to be thrown out, and the complete interpretation, because it seems like the intent of the author is to include that no entity that's receiving foreign funds from foreign individuals, foreign corporations, should be involved in our elections. Therefore, NGOs, corporations, and unions are included in the scope of the intent. And I look forward to further clarification of the actual scope of this bill. Thank you.
Representative Stevenson, did you have a comment?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, and I just want to speak briefly to both Representative Quam and Representative Bliss' comments. First of all, just to be a lawyer here, if you look at the bill language, there's a definition of corporation, and a corporation includes both for-profit and not-for-profit entities. That's on starting lines 2.1, and that isn't even new law. That's just law in Minnesota. The second thing I would note is if you look at the section subdivision 4A, starting on line 3.3, it says that a foreign influence corporation can't make a contribution to a political committee, political fund, or political party unit, and just to translate, political committee, political fund, that's what we call PACs in Minnesota law. So if you're concerned about PACs and super PACs, they're covered under this bill to the extent they're receiving funds from foreign influence corporations. So the concerns that you're articulating are within the bill, number one. Number two, I would go much further if I were king for a day. I would say we should not have nearly as much spending at all. And it's great to hear concern from both sides of the aisle about the level of expenditure in our elections. There is way too much. And I was impressed by how many times Representative Bliss was able to say George Soros' name in one answer. It's probably worth noting that I think Mr. Soros is an American citizen.
Yes.
But, that's maybe neither here nor there. The point would be that I don't think that any individual, whether it's George Soros or I can't remember which Koch brother is still with us, but that person or any other fabulously wealthy person should not have the influence in our elections that they presently have today. Unfortunately, that's not a decision we get to make here at the Minnesota legislature because of Supreme Court jurisprudence. The Supreme Court has gutted our ability to regulate money in elections. This is one narrow area where we have the ability to do something, and I think we should do it because it's something that we actually can do to deal with a problem that Minnesotans are really frustrated with. If you go out and talk to Minnesotans, they will tell you that there's way too much money being spent on our elections. And it's not just a nuisance. They don't like watching TV ads, but it's also a sense that the wealthy and the powerful on both sides of the aisle have way too much influence in our politics. This is not the perfect solution. I wish it was, but it's something we can do.
Thank you, Representative Stevenson.
Mr. Chair, since he was,
Follow-up, Representative Quam.
right. So I thought I heard, for the record, the author of this bill indicating that PACs, and therefore inclusive of unions, would be in this prohibition. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Quam. Representative Greenman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Stevenson, for this bill. As somebody who's been working on this issue as a campaign finance lawyer for a long time, I think it is helpful and important as we think about this bill and what we're doing moving forward about the tools we have to actually take on an issue I think we have all articulated we want to deal with. And when we think about why this can't apply to U.S. citizens, it is because of or U.S. corporations, it is because of the Citizens United decision. This is one of the tools. The other tools we have are disclosure and transparency. And so I hope as we think about the tools we have to deal with the influx of large outside donors, we understand what Representative Stevenson is talking about, which is voters want to know who is spending money in their elections. Voters don't want to be influenced and have large influx of dark money coming from outside the country. And I think it's our obligation to use the tools we have, the limited tools that the Supreme Court has left us, to make sure that in Minnesota, the spending is both domestic and also fully disclosed and transparent. The disclosure we don't have here today, but I think that there's opportunities to work on what you, Representative Bliss, have been talking about. I think what Representative Quam has been talking about, and so I look forward to those further conversations as well.
Thank you, Representative Greenman. Representative Coulter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to clarify something because there have been several references to unions, and I want to clarify this because I'm not a lawyer, but sometimes I play one on TV. My understanding is that membership dues that are paid to unions for the purpose of providing the services that unions provide cannot be used on political activities. Am I correct on that? That was my understanding. I'm not a lawyer, but somebody who is can maybe answer that.
I'm looking for, it's a little beyond the scope of this bill. I'm looking for a hand.
yeah.
If anyone wants to answer that. I don't know. I'm kind of looking at Representative Greenman.
We can move on if it's complicated, but that was my understanding, so I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Representative Torkelson, and then I think I'll go to Representative Stevenson for closing comments. Representative Torkelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know which channel I should tune into to see Representative Coulter's acting abilities, but he did say he plays one on TV, so I assume there's a program out there where I can.
Whatever channel we're on right now.
So for the author, when he's ready.
Getting a pen. Go ahead.
First question, has this issue been in bill form before the legislature in past sessions?
Representative Stevenson.
Mr. Chair, Representative Torkelson, yes. I introduced it for the first time in 2020. I did reintroduce it last biennium, and then I reintroduced it this biennium. So this would be the third legislature that I've introduced this bill into.
Okay, Representative Torkelson.
Thank you. And did it get a hearing?
Representative Stevenson.
We were in discussions to have a hearing in 2020, and then the pandemic hit. I can't even recall if I requested a hearing last biennium. It did not.
Representative Torkelson.
Thank you. So we have an issue before us that has not been heard in committee prior to today. My question really is, how did you decide where to set the bar? And as I understand the bill, the proof of the certification of foreign ownership is put into the lap of the corporations. Is that correct? And then describe how you set the bar.
Representative Stevenson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Representative Torkelson. I'm not sure I quite understand the in the lap comment. As I think Mr. Gehring said, and as I said, there's an objective test that you can look at as to what constitutes a foreign influence corporation that starts on line 2.6 of the as introduced version of the bill, which says if there's one owner who controls more than 1% or two or more who control more than 5%, that it's a foreign influenced corporation. Those numbers, there's a study by the Business Roundtable that says that once you cross that 5% threshold, investors start to have real influence in the operations of the company. And so that's where that number comes from.
Representative Torkelson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I don't know, 5% seems rather arbitrary, but the in the lap comment has to do with line 3.2, certification of compliance with subdivision 4A.
Which line? I'm sorry.
3.2.
I have a different 3.2.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Representative.
This was in my packet.
3.2 for me just says red.
Yeah, I have the
Subdivision 4B.
3.20, maybe, perhaps?
Oh, I'm sorry, 3.20. I haven't been around here very long.
Representative Stevenson?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Representative Torkelson, what subdivision 4B on line 3.20 says that when corporations make contributions, they have to certify that they are not a foreign influence corporation under this section with the Campaign Finance Board. So when Representative Agreement's talking about transparency, that's what we're talking about. That it makes it clear and it provides a record so that regulators and the public can challenge that attestation that they're not a foreign influence corporation.
Representative Torkelson?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for that, Representative Stevenson. So, you know, with this percentage line that's being drawn in the sand, ownership of some corporations, I would imagine, is a somewhat dynamic issue, depending on investors come, investors go. Some of them may be foreign, some of them may be not foreign. It seems that it really puts a burden on the corporation to try and figure out on a virtually daily basis whether they're foreign owned or not, if you're right, if you're close to that threshold. And if you're over it, you are subject to the penalties of this legislation. Can you elaborate on that, or is it we just looking at this is the perfect number we've discovered and we know it's the right percentage?
Representative Stevenson?
Mr. Chair, Representative Torkelson, I think it's important to have an objective standard, okay? I think there should be a number. 5% makes sense to me. If you were to have brought an amendment raising it to 7 or decreasing it to 3, we could have had a conversation about that. I'm not saying that that's, you know, ordained in the stars, that it should be 5%. But it makes sense to me. It has a basis in that at 5%, the business community tells us that investors start to have real influence in the operations of a company. So that's one issue that you raised. The second issue you raised is this compliance issue about, you know, if you have a company that's teetering on the edge of 5, can they make a contribution or not? And, you know, it would depend on what they are at the time they want to make the contribution. And it is a compliance obstacle that a company that's in that specific circumstance would be in. But I hardly think that's a reason to not restrict foreign money in our U.S. elections, is that there might be some compliance difficulties. I think that Minnesotans are tired of the large amounts of money in our politics, and I don't really see that as a reason to not proceed. You know, at the point where you're going to have an objective standard, when you get close to it, it's going to get tricky.
Representative Torkelson, maybe final follow-up? We do have 2 other bills on the agenda.
I'll try to make it my final. So then the last question is, should this legislation have been in place in the last election cycle, what would have been the impact?
Somewhat speculative, but if you have any thoughts, Representative Stevenson?
Mr. Chair, Representative Torkelson, well, I think it's entirely speculative, because part of the problem we have is that we don't know where these companies are spending their money right now, because we don't have enough disclosure and transparency in our election law. And I hope that Representative Agreement and others, and myself included, will work on that. So I don't know how much less would have been spent. It could be a lot, could be a whole lot. Who knows? There's too much money out there that we aren't able to track at all. We have no idea where the money comes from or where it goes.
All right. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, this bill does seem to be a bit of a solution looking for the right problem, but we'll continue the discussions down the road.
Okay. Thank you, Representative Torkelson. Representative Stevenson, any closing remarks?
Well, Mr. Chair, I'll just be brief. I guess I think the problem of overspending in our elections is a very real one that the overwhelming majority of Minnesotans see. I wish we had more tools in the toolbox to address it. I wish the Supreme Court had not adopted a series of cases that empower the fabulously wealthy and huge corporations to dominate our elections. But that is the world that we are living in at the moment. And this is the best tool we have in the toolbox at the moment. So I ask members to vote yes.
With that, Representative Stevenson renews his motion that House File 117 be recommended to be placed on the general register. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
The motion carries.